looking for a lot of other minerals. They're looking for silver, they're looking for copper, they're looking for the minerals that existed in those two areas. Again, even though George Bird Grinnell is viewed as the father of environmental history or environmentalism, and also he's viewed as the person who created Glacier National Park, it originally was not that, he really wasn't doing that at that time. Him and his allies were looking for gold. So today what we're going to be talking about is really this one area here in central Montana, which I have circled. And I'm talking a little bit also about this area over here, which is now Glacier Park, the Rocky Mountains, because they were searching for minerals in that area. This is a map that actually you can find here in Minnesota at the Minnesota History Center. The Minnesota History Center has a huge collection of the materials that were collected by George Bird Grinnell, by the folks at the Great Northern Railroad, because they were one of the allies of George Bird Grinnell in terms of resource extraction and working with kind of the major barons of industry. They were hoping, before this became a park, the folks at Great Northern were hoping that this was also going to be this huge boom of a place where there was going to be, again, gold and mineral extraction. They were going to be making money from mining, not money from Glacier National Park. So that evolved there became a different story. So there's a lot of these documents that you can go and find from that time period that look at this area as a place to find minerals. So this is just one map that shows that. So the actual Blackfeet Reservation is from this red line kind of over to, you can see the edge here, and then this is what is now Glacier National Park, but then it was called the Mineral Strip. So, oh, go again. Sorry, I didn't know it did that. Okay, so for the story of the Rockies, which was Blackfeet territory, they did search for 15 plus years for gold. And literally what you see now as Glacier National Park is an area that was literally no stone unturned. I mean, there were thousands of miners that came in during this 15-year time period. They dug up every single part of the park. They looked up every single creek. There was a town that was in the middle of Glacier National Park called Alden, which had over 1,000 people there. They tried to find minerals throughout this whole area. They didn't find anything of substance. So by about 1909, George Bird Grinnell returns with a different group of businessmen and allies, although some of them were the same. You know, the Great Northern's still there. And they pushed to move this area then to become Glacier National Park. And as we know, Glacier National Park, I have some final, oh, I think hit it again because I think I have one. Okay, so there's a different story though for the Little Rockies, and that's sort of the story that you're going to hear today. The Little Rockies, their story was sort of the exact opposite of what happened to the Rockies, in that in the Little Rockies, they did find gold and other minerals. So it became an area, instead of a place that was preserved for future generations, it became a place that was exploited. So from the 1880s on till today, it is still a place where there is resource extraction. There has been it's been a place for over 100 years that has been an area in the state of Montana that has been exploited for its natural resources, and it has a completely sort of different story than the Rockies. So I wanted to end with these couple of images that are part of the state of Montana's tourism for the Rockies, right? So for this area that is now viewed as an example, as exemplary place of untouched wilderness, right? Of a place that has been considered as sort of this primordial wild area, but it actually was a place, as I had just mentioned earlier, that had been a place of attempted resource extraction in the state of Montana. So these are still the images that you'll find today, you know, of this place that you should come and visit because nobody's ever been there, a place of scenic beauty, and it is now. It has recovered, it's bounced back from those early years of being a place of mining. So I'm going to end there. Okay, thank you.
I want to talk about the fact that the first three presentations that you're hearing today, along with Professor Miles, we are part of a project that has been endeavoring to document an oral history of Red Thunder activism on the Fort Belknap Reservation. So in some ways, there's a sequence of setting up part of what that activity was about, and I'm going to take the baton from where Professor Lapierre left it. Next slide, please. So Professor Lapierre talked about Montana's mineral wealth. If you know anything about the history of Montana, you know that white prospectors poured in at the time when it eventually became a state because of the vast gold and silver and other kinds of metals that were available, Bannock, Virginia City, and so on. I wanted to show you this picture. It duplicates a little bit of what Professor Lapierre did, but you see that in Montana, depending on how you count them, there are something like 50 named mountain ranges. And so some of these, of course, have that kind of mineral wealth. The mountain range we're talking about again today in terms of the Little Rocky Mountains is in the north central part, which you can identify there. And we'll take a look at its importance in Indian country because there are also 7 reservations in the state of Montana. And in a moment, I'll show you how gold pouring out of there. Let's go to the next slide, please. Finally, in 1979, the latest technology was something called low-grade heap leach gold mining. And my dad will tell you more about this, but basically it has to do with raising the mountains by taking tons of ore, putting them on a leach pad and soaking it with poisonous chemicals, including cyanide, and that melts the gold out, but of course then has all these poisons running through the area that has to be contained. Pegasus Gold set up then. 2 mines were in place named after the original prospectors who supposedly discovered gold in the Little Rocky Mountains, Zortman and Lindusky. And there were 2 different mines that they were extracting gold out. In a 2-year period, they took $20 million worth of gold out of that. So again, continuing to be very, very prosperous. Can you please take the next one? And you can see what it does to the mountain when you undertake this very destructive technology. That, of course, again, there's poisons running all about that become difficult to contain. And we'll go to this last slide. And so in the midst of this kind of activity, my dad and others on the reservation decide that it's time to try to work against this destructive mining and sets up an organization called Red Thunder Incorporated that I'll now turn it over to him to discuss at this point. Thank you.
(1948), and my parents' names was Inez Brisboe and William Azure. They were both members of the tribe down there. On our reservation we have 2 tribes. One is a Gros Ventre and one's a Assiniboine, and we learned to live together. At first we were kind of enemies, but we learned to live together after a while of being locked on reservation. The way we understand it back home was our reservation was created more like a prisoner of war camp to get us off of the main part of our land, because we used to roam hunting and fishing the buffalo and everything, the whole state of Montana. But after they decided they wanted our land for gold and silver mining and farming and ranching, they decided to negotiate it. We call it, they call it negotiation, we call it was intimidation and coercion under the Grinnell Agreement. The way they took it away from our ancestors, you know, those lands. Anyway, on the south end of our reservation, like my son said, we have the Little Rocky Mountains. And our mountain range used to extend all the way to the Missouri River until they couldn't keep the miners and the ranchers off of it, so they did that Grinnell coercion deal and extracted quite a bit of the south end of the reservation off of us. And then most of it was covered already, and I guess we use those lands. You know, our ancestors used those lands for hunting and fishing and gathering, and also Native American ceremonies such as fasting and vision quests and stuff like that. And we just liked them the way they were, natural, you know. They had trees on them and mountain streams. We used to hunt and fish, and we used to even drink water out of those streams while we were walking around hunting. It was all clean and natural, you know. Everything was beautiful back in the day. And then all of a sudden these miners came in, you know, the new mining. They petered out in, I think it was the 40s, the original mining, the pick and shovel days, and they left. But later on, this Canadian company came down. I think they were called Wharf Resources Limited. Them out, bought out Wharf Resources. And then they started another subsidiary called Zortman Mining Inc. and then Landusky Mining Inc., a subsidiary of Pegasus. So we found that out by I guess we got interested on when we realized that our fish and wildlife were disappearing in our reservation. We used to hunt and fish and live off the land, and we suspected the mining was causing a lot of problems because they were disappearing. Our fish and wildlife was disappearing, and we didn't know where it was. Finally, we started meeting with some of the people that worked at the mines, which a lot of them were tribal members that worked up there, and they would tell us that in private that they know that they were killing the deer and stuff of fish up there with that poison stuff they used to mine with, and that they had another crew that would come in early in the morning and take the dead carcasses and go bury them before the regular shift would start, and hide the dead animals from the public, you know. And then we wanted to get involved when we realized that it was doing that, so we started a group called Red Thunder Inc. And I believe it was 1989 we started this group, and we got formalized. We put out the word that we needed some attorneys to help us, and we got support from an attorney called Don Marble out of Chester, Montana, and he helped us get organized with the state and the federal government legally, you know. Red Thunder Inc. Under Montana state laws and nonprofit status under IRS laws. So then we got more support from them, and then later on we got our traditional people had friends and relatives in the Denver, Colorado area, and they hooked us up with a group called the Land and Water Fund, which was a large environmental law firm down there, and they volunteered to help us. So they helped us look into the environmental laws and file for a what do you call those injunctions in the Interior Board of Land Appeals in Arlington, Virginia. So we won an injunction in 1990s to stop that next expansion because they were expanding a tier at a time. I think they were on their 10th expansion at the time, and they were going to expand another 200 acres for another giant leach pad, the biggest one yet, called the Sullivan Park leach pad. And we stopped that one just before they got done with it, I guess. They already started building it. But then later on, they won the injunction, and they lifted the injunction and let them continue on. So we started this group, and we started getting more involved and realizing that they were destroying us and our reservation, our natural environment, and our traditional sacred lands of the Little Rocky Mountains. And we created a video called Indian Tears of Love. So we did a documentary video to going around to the old people around the southern end of the reservation and recording on what they had to think about what is going on in the mountains there. And a lot of that was circulated. We used that to circulate amongst the public and to get public support for our cause to try to get them stopped. So we did a pretty good job, I guess, because we were a small group of traditional people on the southern end of the reservation. And we had a lot of help. You know, we had a spiritual advisor named Robert Gopher, came in and helped us from Great Falls, Montana area. Also, we had our environmental attorney, Paul Zog, with the Land and Water Fund in Denver. And we had a film producer, one of our friends named Ollie Zayed from Boulder, Colorado. He came up and helped us do the videotaping and stuff and the documentaries and stuff. Yeah, and 1992 we created another documentary called Extinct Civilization, And we tried to circulate those videos to get public awareness and public support for our cause, to try to bring more awareness, you know, to the problems we were having with this Pegasus Gold Company. And their dangerous cyanide, it was brand new, that cyanide heap leaching, and I think they were kind of proud of it, you know, as a mining company would be, I guess. But the way we seen it, it wasn't that good at all. It was detrimental to our people and to the environment and to the fish and wildlife. A lot of the women in Hayes area, which was right below the Landusky mine, were reporting they were having stillbirths, and a lot of sicknesses were popping up over there, and they kind of suspected it might be the mines, because the drainages came right down onto our reservation from the mine, from the Landusky mine mainly. The Zortman mine ran east, and the Landusky mine ran onto our reservation. And they thinking it was getting in their drinking water, and that was causing a lot of health problems to our people in the Hayes area. Then in 1993, lobbied the congressman to try to get swing votes to amend the 1872 mining law to try to get a little stricter, you know, and a little more monitoring and a little more tighter reins on that these mining corporations, foreign mining corporations going all over, mining basically for free, and then claiming the minerals underneath the land and destroying the environment and getting rich quick, and then leaving, you know. They just get up and leave, and then they dump the reclamation and the cleanup on the taxpayers. You know, they file bankruptcy and walk away, and that's exactly what happened there. Yeah, in 1998, they went down to Reno, Nevada, and filed bankruptcy, and left. You know, there's a lot of money that changed hands. We don't even know what all the money was and who it all went to, but I know we, as Red Thunder, we were the initial, I guess, the initial traditional group that stood up against the mining company as a small group, and started that, you know, how would you say, objection to what they were doing and how they were expanding. But we didn't realize it right away, because it was just terrible, you know, to see our natural environment disappearing, looking at our mountain tops and they were gone, chopped off. We couldn't believe that would actually be happening, you know. How could they do that? But they did it anyway, you know. Then once they filed bankruptcy, they made an agreement with the tribal government, our tribal government, tribal council. I think they got $1 million settlement out of it for helping clean up, a little bit of the cleanup. And then they promised the EPA 20 million or something like that to help with the cleanup and stuff like that. And then they basically walked away from it, you know. And to this day, I guess we still have polluted water up there, and they say that this water up there will need to be treated indefinitely because of the acid mine drainage and self-producing poisonous chemicals that come out of there. And our creeks are still yellow and still dead of vegetation, and fish and wildlife are not healthy anymore, you know. But I think it's starting to heal up now that they're gone. And I don't know who's watching the cleanup, the reclamation. I think it might be that Bureau of Land Management and the Montana Department of State Lands are supposed to be monitoring that cleanup, you know, and hopefully they'll do a good job up there. Anyway, we dissolved our corporation, Red Thunder Inc., in I believe it was 1998. We didn't file any more papers because we won our cause, and we weren't about money. We're just about trying to save our mountains for future generations, you know, and hopefully they'll be clean and be reclaimed back to a more natural environment, and hopefully they won't come in anymore and do that again. And that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
You have to do something with that rock. And in Wisconsin, our federal and state wetlands were protected. Federal wetlands are still protected, but the state passed an iron mining bill that allows this mining waste to be dumped anywhere as long as it's not on a federally protected wetland list. And also allows high-capacity wells to be sunk anywhere because, of course, mining operations use a lot of water. And the interesting last paragraph, and I might get a conjunction wrong, but essentially it said, should any Wisconsin law, administrative code, or executive order come in conflict with the iron mining law, comma, the iron mining law prevails. So, anyway, taconite. Ultimately, the U.S. Supreme Court affirmed, not gave, affirmed our rights to hunt, fish, and gather, and eventually things settled down when Exxon announced it was going to create this enormous gold and silver copper mine at Crandon. Something really interesting happened. A lot of the same hook and bullet clubs, the hunters and fishers, non-Indian hunters and fishers, who had been throwing rocks at the Ojibwe just a few years earlier, kind of looked at the political landscape and saw, this major environmental threat. And ironically, the only thing standing between them and economic ruin was Indian treaty rights. And so there was this odd kind of coalition of people that formed and were successful in blocking this Exxon mine. Those coalitions sort of went underground. Well, they didn't go underground. They just were dormant for a while because there was no threat. Interestingly, one of the things that came out of this fight against Exxon was a mining moratorium bill but it only applies to sulfide mines. Basically said, if you want to mine in Wisconsin, you have to show 2 other mines that successfully mined without environmental pollution for 10 years and were closed for 10 years. So we haven't had any sulfide mining since then. But then there was a change of political leadership, and I won't go there. Otherwise, there might be blood coming out of my whatevers. And so suddenly the state message was, we want to be open for mining again. So in 2011, Gogebic Taconite announced that it was going to build what would have been the largest open pit taconite mine in the world. And those interesting coalitions reformed, and the Ojibwe banded together, the environmental groups and the hunting and fishing groups came together, and 3 Ojibwe 14-year-olds decided to do a documentary. So to tell you about Bad River and the Ojibwe is that we are guided by what we call a 7th generation philosophy, which tells us when we make an important decision today, we need to think about how that decision will affect generations 7 into the future. So it's really a very long-range philosophy, especially when it comes to environmentalism. So the 3 young people that I was working with who were part of a tribal youth media initiative, I have a wonderful team of colleagues that spends time on Indian reservations in northern Wisconsin and teaches high technology, video editing, website design. I was going to say kick-ass, but that didn't sound very academic. Are the 7th generation, because they actually were the 7th generation from our chiefs who signed the cession treaties, and so they felt this sort of connection. And they wanted to start their documentary with an explanation of the 7th generation philosophy. Did we miss that? Is there a... I guess it's coming up. Okay. So they conducted research. They decided who they wanted to interview. There were 17 people that wound up being interviewed for the documentary. They shot it themselves. Every frame of video shot by a 15-year-old Well, he turned 15. He was 14 when we started. They shot, they wrote, they narrated, and I was their editor. They told me what they wanted, where they wanted it. But other than that, I was just sort of a guilty bystander to this operation. So here's an excerpt from it. Their comments were presented fairly. Everybody seemed to be okay with it. We had a community premiere. There were all these regional film festivals. The Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies at UW-Madison created several hundred copies that were distributed to the media and to various environmental groups because we didn't have the budget for that sort of thing. And certainly this was not the sole reason that Gogebeck withdrew from the project. There were a couple of key things that happened. One was initially, we have a picture of a miner on our state seal as well. And the idea that people had in Wisconsin was, grandpa with a little pickaxe going over, going to work in a shaft mine. And once they realized, what a moonscape open pit iron mining really creates, people were very concerned about the environment. The company hired commandos, private security people in masks and automatic weapons who suddenly showed up patrolling the North Woods, and that scared off a lot of people as well. And then the price of taconite fell. That was probably the major reason why they pulled out. But in any event, the company pulled out. But this is really, to me, reminiscent on, of course, a much smaller scale to what's going on in North Dakota right now. This notion that it's okay to make indigenous communities sacrifice zones because they're, they have a lot of land and they don't understand the relationship that we have with our natural resources. They, the Sami call reindeer their children. We call wild rice our relative. This mine would have poisoned 75 acres of ancient wild rice relatives. And so, I think it's really important for all of us as historians to make those connections, which we're making today, but also look for those kinds of stories and give voice to communities that really haven't had much of a voice. Miigwech.
Something uniquely powerful in the ways that so many indigenous peoples, the Ojibwa, the Gros Ventre, the Assiniboine, the Blackfoot, the Sami, from so many places around the globe, have become contemporary champions of the non-human world. To add an example from my own work, I'd mention the Ashuar, a native people of the Amazonian jungles of Peru and Ecuador, many of whom are now battling international corporations seeking to exploit the rich timber, oil, and mineral wealth of their homelands. There are many others like them. Now, how can we account for this powerful grassroots or jungle roots or tundra roots indigenous resistance to modernity's insatiable drive to mine what it dismissively terms natural resources from every last square meter of the planet? In challenging the idea of the non-human organisms that these mines threaten. For the Ojibwa, it is their centuries-long connection to wild rice, a graceful, shallow water-loving plant that helped to pull them into a fertile bond with the wetlands of the Bad River. For the Sami, it is the reindeer, the intelligent social animals whose cooperation the Sami surely cultivated as much as they created. For the Gros Ventre, the Assiniboine, the Blackfoot is perhaps a broader landscape itself, but within that, always their close relationship to the particular plants, animals, and mountains whose vibrant nature had given them so much. So to conclude then, I wondered what our speakers might think of reviving the concept of the ecological Indian. But this time, when we say ecological, we would mean not just a relationship as defined by contemporary ecological science, but also the dynamic human partnerships that indigenous peoples have frequently formed with a world of extraordinary organisms and things. Partnerships that endure today and that transcend conventional boundaries between culture and nature, that suggest a much broader concept of the ecological than the scientific term can capture. In this, our Anthropocene epoch, the supposed age of humans, I wonder if this new understanding of the ecological Indian might not point us towards a less anthropocentric and a more humble understanding of the human place on a creative planet. So thank you very much.
That I could adapt my skills to. And usually Native communities are really, you know,
They are all about the loss of land, right? And what happens to places and to communities when they lose their land. And in the case that I was talking about, you know, the Blackfeet lost their land, but now it's become a huge tourism, a place of tourism. And it's seen as, again, sort of this pristine wilderness that exists. It doesn't have the same story as the Little Rockies for sure, which is basically a Superfund site, right? We could have become a Superfund site, but I think all these stories are about Native communities still trying to, on the one hand, claim land that is part of their historic and traditional territory, and whether that claim is based on economy or is based on protection, environmental protection. It's still an effort in the 21st century to remind people that those are native lands, and so that's not as philosophical an answer as you would like, but I think that's sort of on a very basic level. But a lot of those lands as well do have stories. So, for example, with the Blackfeet and Glacier National Park. Glacier National Park is an area that has several places that we consider sacred, and the reason they're sacred is because it's places where supernatural beings or supernatural entities actually physically live there, right? And so part of our connection to that place and part of the reason why we still claim it as our territory is because that is where the supernatural continues to live. And we are fortunate, we're extremely fortunate that we did not suffer the same environmental degradation that has happened to the Little Rockies, which is, it's extreme. In the state of Montana, we have 22 Superfund sites. All of those Superfund sites are on native land, right? And those are native places. And so, so on the one hand, although my community may be fortunate in that sense, other communities are still struggling with protection but bottom line, we still claim the space, whether it is polluted or whether it's pristine.
Yeah, really core, and one is the power of history, of foregrounding these historical threads, partly to say this is not an empty land, this is not a barren land, we are not dead, we are still here, and we still have rights. In Sapmi it's slightly different because treaties were not signed, they don't have ceded territory rights, so the Sami have gone to the UN to work in different ways to reassert those rights. But the other key thing has been water, almost even more than land, that the purity of water in the Upper Great Lakes region is such a water-rich region. And the communities I've worked with have worked very hard to establish powerful networks within the communities, but also alliances across communities that Patty mentioned. So I got involved with Anishinaabe opposition or Ojibwe opposition when Mike Wiggins Jr., the chairman of the tribe, came to a group of us at the university who were meeting with the Moa Lake Saucalgan, who had stopped the Crandon mine, and said, we need your help. And so I said, and some others said, here are my skills, what can I do? And I guess that was an answer.
And she did a lot.
Yeah, well, whatever. One of my skills was going to endlessly Senate hearings and saying, well, there's the 1909 treaty, there's the Boundary Waters Treaty, there's the 1842 treaty, and the senators would say, what are you talking about? What treaties? You know, a Boundary Waters Treaty, and you know, what's going to happen? Canada's going to invade? The Bad River are going to invade? And it's like, no, but they're going to stop this. No, I didn't say that. I just say, well, I'm not a lawyer. I'll have to have our lawyer get back to you. But so anyway, so my point was that water was a very, and continues to be an incredibly powerful way, because water crosses these boundaries between species, between the past and the future, across nations, across cultures. And water, the quality of water, has been such a powerful way. So I was part of the International Joint Commission's Lake Superior Binational Forum, which brings together communities, tribes, indigenous groups around Lake Superior to just be there, to be the stakeholder representation. And when we worked with the Pic River Band of Ojibwe on the North Shore of Lake Superior in Canada, the Canadian government cut all our Canadian funding. And then when we worked with the Bad River, what happened to our US funding? It all vanished. But anyway, so the key point was we adopted from the Anishinaabe the motto that water is life, and the quality of water defines the quality of life. So I don't know if that's specially indigenous, but it was especially powerful for the Upper Great Lakes world.
Father Frederick Pegon, in the 1940s, worked for the Montana Writers Project, which was funded by the WPA. And one of his jobs was to try to preserve culture and traditions among the Gros Ventres during that period by talking to old people and so on. And he wrote a lot of stuff, but one thing he wrote was a biography of one of our most famous Gros Ventre medicine men called Bull Lodge. And part of Bull Lodge's journey to the power that he had was to fast and pray on 7 different buttes throughout north central Montana. I think reading this account raises an interesting complication around how you think of land, what the term land even means. Because in each of these buttes he would fast and pray, and in the middle of that he would receive a vision. He would get this vision by going inside the butte, where he was hosted by non-human beings, very powerful persons who would offer him gifts. And so you might think that this is an example of a spirit being living in that particular place, but all of these buttes, and there are a lot of them, seem to have these persons there, that he would call on those specific butte beings at various points in his ceremonies and so on. So it, I think, also raises the question of how extensive the idea of animate animation extends cosmologically to include something like land. You know, to what degree are lands themselves alive? Is there a distinction to be made between a person living or residing in on a butte, or the butte itself is that person in some metaphorical way, or more literal way? So anyway, that's just something I don't know. I don't have an authoritative answer for that, but I just find it very, very interesting that maybe even the idea of land being divorced from living beings is itself a dichotomy that is imposed in how we even think about terms like land.
I think what you just think tank with Oren Lyons, Onondaga, I think he's the faith keeper of the turtle clan of the Onondaga, and an academic as well. And he said, you know, when Western folks look out a window, they see natural resources, and when we look out a window, we see relatives. And I think that makes Western scholars really nervous, whether it's historians who, you know, what are we going to do with dreams and visions? And that's just, you know, that makes people very uncomfortable. Or with science, which kind of speaks to what you're talking about with the ecological Indian. You know, science is really going to have to broaden its definition in order to accommodate an ecological approach, intellectual approach from Native people. Because, you know, in science, a scientist looks at the landscape and plucks out something interesting to study and eliminates all the variables except the most essential variable, and then subjects it to a repeatable experiment and declares its truth. And you know, the traditional ecological knowledge keepers in our communities would say, well, as soon as you take the part out of the whole, you've changed the integrity, you know, you've compromised the integrity of both the part and the whole, And why would you eliminate the subjective? I mean, you're talking about the Northern Lights, and if somebody gave you a written definition of what the aurora borealis is, with, you know, photons shedding off the sun, and you said, do you really understand what this is? Most of the people would say, probably not. And I would argue that you have to see the northern, you have to have that subjective experience to truly know what the Northern Lights is. You know, that it's not just the scientific explanation. In order to have that knowledge, you have to experience it. And this is what, you know, Native people would say, and would tell you, in order to understand us, you have to understand that we have this reciprocity with the plants and animals in our homeland. It's not just that, you know, it's not a commodification of the natural resources. We may sell but even before we get to that point, we understand that there's a relationship that we have, and so we do something and then we're able to harvest that. But the knowledge that there are relatives never goes away. And that's a really, really hard thing to get through to mainstream culture that doesn't have that sense of the sacred with its landscape.